And he looked at people who were very successful in their line of life, be they athletes or politicians or musicians or whatever. And one of the things that an artist, one of the things that he found was that almost all of them didn't hyper specialize like we're encouraging kids to do this in this day and age. What I would rather they do, instead of criticizing leaders in your home, is ask your daughter, if you were president of the United States right now, what would you do? If you were the principal of your school, how would you handle that problem that's going on in your school? If there's people complaining about their playing time and they're upset with the coach and they're criticizing the coach, if you were the head coach, how would you handle that issue? So they start putting themselves in the shoes of leaders, trying to problem solve and think like a leader. So they start to see themselves as being a leader, as opposed to somebody who's going to get blasted. Because I think a lot of times parents have a sense of what they want. Sometimes it's what they don't want. They don't want certain parts of their childhood. They want some parts. I think what happens is that we can get triggered with old things that aren't resolved in our own lives from our past. And when you have kids, they will trigger all kinds of things.
Sort of in line with that, would you recommend then that we expose our daughters to as many activities as possible or as many potential hobbies as possible versus maybe applying pressure for them to become really good or elite at one thing? And you touched on it earlier when you said you ask parents to envision how they want their kids to be when they're grown up, and no one mentions that they want their kid to be, super successful in a particular sport or business or whatever the case is.
Absolutely. I think, first of all, I would follow their lead. And so if they show an interest in playing piano, or they show an interest in soccer, then maybe they try a soccer team and they do that for a while and they go, I don't like this anymore. Then great. What do you want to do now? I would follow their lead for the most part. There's a book I read, a year or two ago called Range by David Epstein, I think. And he looked at people who were very successful in their line of life, be they athletes or politicians or musicians or whatever. And one of the things that he found was that almost all of them didn't hyper specialize like we're encouraging kids to do this in this day and age. What most of those people did was a range of things. So most people who play violin in the symphony orchestra play like 2 or 3 or 4 instruments. Almost every professional athlete, when they interview them, didn't just play football or just play basketball. They played a range of sports. And it was from that range of experiences that got them along the way. So I think it's important if your kids are, I'll just use sports as an example. It's so important to get a good coach early on. It's important to get a good coach always, but especially when they're young. You want somebody who is fun, who gets the kids involved, because the number one reason that kids quit sports is because it's not fun anymore. Most often either because the coach is a nut and screaming and yelling, it's all about winning, or the parents are nutty and they're screaming and yelling, and it's all about winning. So I think it's good to encourage kids to try lots of things. I encourage kids who are really doing lots of sports to do some art thing, to get in a play or play an instrument or write poetry or something, or join the art club at school, because they need a breadth of experience to be well-rounded. I think it's important to be well-rounded. So if you're just doing theater or you're just doing this, I think it's good to stretch and try different things. If you don't like it, then just keep trying things. I see some parents who get so upset and so worried because their kid hasn't found their thing yet. And a lot of times they're talking like a 7-year-old or a 12-year-old, like he's 12, she's 7. A lot of people didn't find their thing when they're that age. It's okay. Let them sample. Let them meander until they find their thing. It's okay. That's pretty normal.
I think some of that comes back to letting kids be kids and letting them enjoy their childhood. Your 6th and latest book, She Leads, A Practical Guide for Raising Girls Who Advocate, Influence, and Lead, is available for purchase anywhere online where you can buy books, and it's on your website as well. Can you give us just a brief background on why you wrote that book and also what a reader will be able to take away from that?
Well, one of the reasons was because I was hearing from girls what I think is a distorted view of what it means to be a leader, to be brave, to be courageous, to be strong. So I wanted to give parents an idea about there's other ways of looking at leadership and developing leaders. I also found that in our weekend retreats and our summer camps, it's not a leadership camp, but what I found was I think a lot of those girls end up becoming leaders because of they had high social emotional intelligence. They knew themselves. They understood other people. They knew what made them tick and what other people tick. They knew how to resolve conflicts directly, effectively, and peacefully. They had learned skills that to me are really important for leaders. I read an interesting book, probably 10 years ago, called The Athena Doctrine. Athena was the goddess of strength and whatever. And these authors, two men actually, went around the world to, I think it was 30 countries, 30 cultures, asking questions about, who are the leaders in your country? What would you describe as being the more feminine versus masculine qualities of leadership? And pretty much every country had the same answers. That the male qualities were things like uh, confidence and pride and power and control and aggression and competition and those sorts of things. The more feminine qualities were more things like collaboration, intuition, kindness. They showed strength and leadership in a different way. One quick example from Israel. There was and is problems at the border between Israel and Palestine, fighting, skirmishing, all that. I mean, even before what's going on in the last couple of months, or the last month or so. And so they didn't know what to do. So what they decided to appoint a woman to be in charge of that, the borders. Her name was, I forgot, Weinstein or something. Anyway, so one of the first things she did was she replaced the guards with women at the border because what she found and what ended up coming true was that women were much less likely to be triggered. They're more likely to be patient and more likely to listen to both sides and not just overpower people. And so because of that, the number of skirmishes started going down. So again, I wanted people to understand too that, like I said before, leadership isn't necessarily being president of the student council. There's lots of ways of looking at it. There's lots of ways you can help your daughters to create the life that they want for themselves, to create their own path, and to trust themselves and to trust their gut and to trust their intuition and to be able to set boundaries and know they're not being mean and to be able to speak up and to advocate for themselves and to take care of themselves. There's so many ways that we can. Let me give you another quick example. One of the things I encourage parents to do with their daughters, and this would be true for sons too, is we tend to complain a lot about our leaders. We criticize the president of the United States. We criticize the principal of the school. We criticize the head coach. We criticize leaders. And because of that, it's kind of like, who wants to be a leader? Would you want to be president of the United States? It's just
Great
all
point.
that fluff. And so I tell them what I would rather they do instead of criticizing leaders in your home is ask your daughter, if you were president of the United States right now, what would you do? If you were the principal of your school, how would you handle that problem that's going on in your school? If there's people complaining about their playing time and they're upset with the coach and they're criticizing the coach, if you were the head coach, how would you handle that issue? So they start putting themselves in the shoes of leaders, trying to problem solve and think like a leader. So they start to see themselves as being a leader as opposed to somebody who's going to get blasted.
That's such a great point. You've given so many really, really just impactful frameworks for, I think, how listeners, viewers can think about raising their kids. I know I'm going to be implementing some of the things you mentioned. That leader point was great because we, as a society, just in general, we really do criticize our leaders constantly, and very often we don't praise them or
Hmm.
ask what we would do differently. So that's such a great point. Your podcast, Raising Daughters, you have over 200 episodes. I'm sure it's filled with useful content for folks, and that can be streamed absolutely anywhere that podcasts are available, correct?
Correct. Some of the podcasts are just me talking about an issue. I just wrote up one yesterday about teaching kids how to resolve conflicts peacefully. Many of them, especially in the last 6 months, I interview a lot of authors. I read a lot. Um, People who are doing really cool things, and so I'll interview authors. But I also interview kids a lot, which I like to do. I had some high school seniors at my house about 2 weeks ago. We recorded two podcasts. One was about the dating scene with high school students today. It was fascinating, and the other was their look at social media. we judge it and we're worried about it, and it's usually an adult sort of conversation as opposed to, well, what do they see in it? How are they affected by it? What's their viewpoint? So I think those are really fascinating listens for parents to try and get into the head of girls at different ages and say, wonder what's going on for girls, and how can I then apply that to my daughter, or even better, listen to this podcast with my daughter and spur a conversation about whatever the issue might be.
I would encourage anyone with a daughter to listen to your podcast and also to buy your book. The podcast has been great. There's 200 plus episodes, so I haven't listened to all of them just yet, but I plan on doing so as my daughter, approaches adulthood. So I'm sure I'll get through them over the next few years.
But there'll be more. There's one a week.
Yeah. So I'll have to maybe speed up the pace a little bit. I do really appreciate your time, Dr. Jordan. But before you leave, I need to ask you for what we call a hole in one, which is just your most impactful piece of advice that you can give to a listener or viewer that will have a positive impact on their life, or in this case, perhaps the way that they're raising their daughters.
Can I do two holes in one?
Yep.
Because sometimes parents ask me, if you could give me one piece of advice that would help my parenting, what would you say? And so two things. One of them is do your own personal growth. Because I think a lot of times parents have a sense of what they want. Sometimes it's what they don't want. They don't want certain parts of their childhood. They want some parts. But I think what happens is that we can get triggered with old things that aren't resolved in our own lives from our past. And when you have kids, they will trigger all kinds of things. And sometimes it causes us to not parent in the way that we want. It evokes a lot of emotion, sometimes anger, whatever, or anxiety. So I say clean it up as best you can, and then also clean up things that have to do with your marriage, so that you have a happy, nurturing marriage to model for your kids. So one thing is do your own work, so you don't bring that into your children's. I think the second thing might be that listening piece, that learning to stay quiet and listen and try and get in your kids' shoes and walk around for a while, like Atticus Finch talked about in To Kill a Mockingbird. To get in people's skin and walk around, try and see it from their point of view. If our daughters know that we care about them, we love them enough to really want to see it from their point of view and to try and understand how they're seeing things, I think that's a huge, huge, huge gift for them, to know that they have somebody they can go to. There's all kinds of research about kids who've been through adversities growing up. And one of the most important buffers for them is having at least one adult who was that nurturing person, who was there, who took them under their wing, who listened to them, understood them, saw them for who they are, saw them even in a higher vision that they could see for themselves. Having one person like that is the best buffer for kids who go through adversities, which is every kid. All kids have adversity along the way. It's part of life. So, but having that person who's there in that loving, nurturing way, who can listen and be there for them, that's huge.